We've all been there, right? Sitting in classrooms, hours spent listening, taking notes, uh, trying to absorb information. That's the traditional model.
Right. Passive reception, rote memorization. It's how it's been done for ages.
But what if that whole approach is just fundamentally not how our brains actually learn best?
Well, that's a huge question.
Exactly. And today we're doing a deep dive into something called Optimum Learnography. It's this groundbreaking system backed by neuroscience that says the brain learns best not by listening, but by doing.
Actively constructing knowledge.
Yeah. So our mission here is to explore how this system works, what this brain building actually looks like, and how it could genuinely change the way you learn and remember things.
Whether you're a student, maybe just learning for fun, or even just curious about how the mind works.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The source material seems pretty critical of traditional schooling. What are some of the key issues it points out with that passive model, beyond just being boring sometimes?
Well, the research really highlights that these traditional methods, focused on the teacher talking and students listening, they often fall short
Fall short. How?
when fostering real long-term understanding,
Right.
deep retention, and also student autonomy, the ability to learn on your own. It's about what the brain isn't doing in that passive setup.
Okay, it's not being actively engaged in the right way.
Precisely. It's like trying to learn to ride a bike just by watching someone else. You don't build the actual skill that way.
That makes sense. So if just listening isn't the optimal path, what is the alternative they're putting forward? And this is where Optimum Learnography steps in, presented as this powerful brain-based solution. How does the source actually define it?
It's defined as the optimized process of transferring knowledge through structured motor engagement.
Motor engagement, like physical action.
Exactly. Physical action, spatial learning, and also self-directed practice. It's about aligning the learning activities with the brain's kind of natural architecture for acquiring and holding on to knowledge.
So less fighting against the grain, more working with how the brain is wired, making learning active.
That's the core idea. Active, not passive.
And there's a central tool in this brain-building process, right? Something specific the source mentions. Yeah, it talks about these books of knowledge transfer. They sound central to the whole thing. How are they different from, say, a regular textbook?
Oh, they're fundamentally different. They're not just repositories of information. They're designed as tools to actively build what the system calls brain pages.
Brain pages. Okay, what's a brain page?
Think of it like a mental module, a solid piece of memory architecture that you construct yourself.
No.
Through specific actions, the book guides you through writing things out by hand, solving problems, visualizing concepts, and this specific kind of repetition called cyclic rehearsal.
And the idea is these brain pages are more durable.
Much more durable, yeah. More reliable, easier access later compared to stuff you just tried to memorize by listening or rereading. It becomes part of your mental toolkit.
Okay, that's a really interesting distinction. Not just reading the book, but using it to build something inside your head. So how does that building process actually work in a learning session? What are the steps?
Right. A typical session follows a kind of rhythm, usually 5 steps.
Hmm?
First is scan and visualize.
Okay.
You quickly look over the topic, the tasks, and crucially, you try to form a mental picture or maybe sketch a quick diagram. It's like priming the brain.
Getting the lay of the land.
Exactly. Second step, copy and write. You physically write down key definitions, formulas, maybe process steps by hand.
Why by hand specifically?
That motor action engages the brain differently, more deeply. It helps form procedural memory, the how-to memory.
Got it. Step 3.
Solve problems. You tackle problems, and they usually get progressively harder. Mistakes here are actually part of the process. You learn from correcting them. This really kicks the prefrontal cortex into gear for critical thinking.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Learning by doing, including the mistakes.
Then fourth is rehearse in cycles. This is that cyclozeid rehearsal. Short, focused bursts of repetition.
Like flashcards, but maybe more structured.
Sort of, but it's about locking the knowledge in, strengthening the neural pathways. This specifically targets the hippocampus and thalamus, key for long-term memory.
Okay, strengthening those connections. And the last step.
Organize and reflect. Using tools like mind maps or diagrams to structure what you've learned, connecting the dots, seeing the bigger picture, helps integrate it all.
Wow, okay. That sounds incredibly active, like a mental obstacle course almost. What's the underlying science? Why is this sequence so effective? You mentioned some brain regions.
Yes, this is where the neuroscience angle gets really fascinating. It's not just random steps. It's designed to activate a whole network of brain regions together.
Like which ones?
Well, for the spatial and motor parts, the writing, the organizing, you've got the posterior parietal cortex and the basal ganglia heavily involved.
Okay.
Then for memory consolidation, especially with that cyclozeid rehearsal, the hippocampus and the thalamus are crucial. They work together to move information into long-term storage.
Makes sense for memory. What else?
Your prefrontal cortex is working hard during the problem solving, the reasoning, the planning aspects, and interestingly, the cerebellum is also activated.
The cerebellum. I thought that was mostly for balance and coordination.
It does that too, but it's also key for motor learning and storing procedural knowledge. Think of it like muscle memory, but for concepts learned through doing.
So it's like the whole brain is getting a workout, all coordinated.
Pretty much, it's about engaging multiple systems simultaneously through these active processes.
That really drives home why just listening might be insufficient. So beyond the 5 steps in the brain regions, what are the sort of fundamental pillars of this learnography system?
There are 3 core principles, really. First, motor learning is central. That emphasis on physical interaction, writing, drawing, manipulating things. It anchors knowledge differently.
Right, the doing part.
Second, spatial and visual organization. Using maps, diagrams, even just the layout in the book helps your brain create a mental map of the information. Where things are located spatially helps you remember them.
Like know which corner of the page a formula was on.
Exactly, that kind of spatial encoding. And third, that cyclozeid rehearsal. Repeating in those short, cyclical bursts. It's designed specifically to strengthen the neural connections efficiently, making recall faster and more automatic over time.
Okay, motor spatial rehearsal. Got it.
Hmm.
And how do these principles get embedded into those books of knowledge transfer? You mentioned 7 dimensions. That sounds complex.
It is a framework, yeah. The 7 dimensions of knowledge transfer. It's basically the blueprint for designing these books so they trigger all these processes.
Can you give us a sense of what they are? Maybe highlight a couple.
Sure. So you have things like the definition spectrum, clear definitions, examples, images. The function matrix, understanding how things work, asking why. The block solver, breaking down problem solving step by step. The hippocampus, those spatial organizers, charts, diagrams. The task formator drills, timed activities for fluency.
Okay, those sound somewhat familiar, maybe more structured versions of things in good textbooks. What else?
Well, 2 dimensions that feel really different are the module builder and dark knowledge.
Module builder.
Yeah, this involves mini projects. You're not just absorbing, you're building something, creating something, using what you learned. It really reinforces it.
Active creation. And dark knowledge. Sounds mysterious.
It kind of is. It's about pushing beyond the explicitly taught material. Open-ended challenges, what-if questions, things that tap into intuition or maybe even unconscious learning. Problems where the path isn't obvious.
Wow. Okay, so that's really stretching the thinking.
Yeah.
This whole 7-dimension structure makes the book sound less like a text and more like an interactive learning device.
That's exactly the goal.
But how does this change the classroom? If students are working through these books actively, what happens to the teacher? The source mentions brainpage classrooms. What does that actually look like? Is the teacher just gone?
No, not gone, but the role changes dramatically. They shift from being the main instructor at the front, the source of all knowledge.
The sage on the stage.
Right. They become more of a brain page moderator, a facilitator. Their job is to guide students as they work through the material themselves at their own pace.
So more coaching, less lecturing.
Exactly. Checking progress, helping troubleshoot when a student gets stuck, providing personalized feedback, helping them correct their own mistakes as they build those brain pages. The students take much more ownership.
And the classroom space itself might change.
Yeah, you might see different zones, maybe a quiet zone for scanning and writing, an area for problem solving, maybe a space for rehearsal, even a spot for sharing or collaborating. It becomes a dynamic workshop for learning.
That is a fundamental shift, a really different energy. So with such a big change, what are the results? What does the research or the pilot programs actually show? Are there tangible benefits?
The results highlighted are pretty striking, actually. One of the big ones is accelerated learning. They're seeing younger students, even around age 10, grasping concepts usually taught much later, things like basic calculus, algebra, even coding principles. They learn it faster because they're building it through motor activity.
Age 10 doing calculus basics, that's quite something.
It really reframes what's possible, doesn't it? Then there's enhanced retention. Students seem to remember more for longer. Those brain pages seem to stick.
Okay, learning faster and remembering it better. What else?
Reduce distractions. Because students are so actively involved, off-task behavior apparently drops significantly. They're too busy building.
That makes intuitive sense.
And a really important one, inclusivity. The approach seems very effective for students who might struggle in traditional settings, those with attention deficits, dyslexia, ADHD,
Why is that?
because it leans so heavily on visual, spatial, and motor strategies, which can be strengths for those learners, rather than relying purely on auditory processing or passive reading.
So it levels the playing field somewhat.
It seems to, yes. Plus, it fosters autonomy and confidence. Students learn self-regulation, time management, problem-solving skills. They become more independent learners.
These benefits sound amazing: accelerated learning, better retention, inclusivity, more autonomy. It sounds almost too good to be true. What are the catches? What are the challenges in actually implementing something like this?
Well, yeah, like any major change, there are definite hurdles. A big one is teacher retraining. Shifting from lecturing to moderating is a huge professional development need. Teachers need support and training for this new role.
That's a significant lift for schools.
Absolutely. Then there's the book redesign, creating these specialized books of knowledge transfer with all 7 dimensions. That takes time, expertise, and investment. It's not just tweaking existing textbooks.
Right, a whole new generation of materials is needed.
Assessment is another one. Assessment updates. How do you measure brain page development or self-directed learning effectively? Traditional tests focused on rote recall won't capture it well.
So you need new ways to evaluate learning.
Exactly. And finally, you can run into cultural resistance. Parents, educators, even students might be wary of something so different from the familiar model. There can be pushback against change.
Understandable challenges? Does the source suggest ways to tackle these?
It does. It talks about starting with pilot programs in schools that are eager to innovate, providing extensive workshops and ongoing support for teachers.
Building capacity.
Yes, and maybe developing open source templates for these books to lower the barrier to entry for creating materials. Plus, really engaging the community, parents, policymakers to explain the why behind it.
So a gradual, supportive approach. Looking bigger picture then, what does the study suggest are the long-term implications if optimum learnography were to become more widespread? How could it change education, tech, policy?
The implications are potentially huge. It suggests nothing short of revolutionizing classrooms, moving away from teaching for listening towards learning through brain page making as the central activity.
A paradigm shift.
Definitely. It calls for a massive curriculum and material redesign across the board, urging publishers and creators to adopt frameworks like the 7 dimensions.
That would reshape the entire educational publishing industry.
It could. On the policy and reform front, the idea is to integrate these principles into national strategies, teacher certification programs, make it systemic.
And technology, AI.
Oh, huge potential there. EdTech and AI could play a massive role. Imagine digital platforms that guide brain page sessions, track progress in real time, offer personalized feedback, adapt the modules based on how you're doing.
Truly personalized learning engines.
Precisely. And the principles aren't limited to academics. The study suggests expansion into learning skills in the arts, emotional intelligence, practical life skills, complex problem solving.
So a way to learn almost anything more effectively.
That's the vision. And ultimately, establishing dedicated brain page schools or smaller miniature school systems as models, as innovation hubs to show what's possible when you fully commit to this approach.
Wow, so it's really not just about a better way to use books. It's a fundamental rethinking of the entire learning process, putting the learner's active brain construction right at the center. So let's bring it back. What's the key takeaway for you, the listener?
The core idea seems to be that this optimum learnography offers a really different, science-backed way to learn.
Exactly. It's about empowering you, making you the architect of your own knowledge, shifting from passively receiving information to actively building durable mental structures. Those brain pages.
It changes the fundamental question, doesn't it?
It really does. Instead of asking how well did the teacher explain that, the question becomes, how effectively did I build brain power on that topic?
By doing the writing, the solving, the visualizing.
By aligning with how the brain naturally learns best through action, structured repetition, visual mapping, and that internal drive. It's a path to deeper understanding, genuine mastery.
Just imagine if every book, every learning resource wasn't just static information, but was designed as this dynamic engine. An engine for building these lasting mental modules, these brain pages, making knowledge truly part of you, deeply stored, easy to pull up, ready to use.
It's a powerful image.
And the model suggests that every page approached this way could be a step towards unlocking more of your own potential. The science seems pretty clear on this point. The brain doesn't optimize learning by just listening. It optimizes by doing, by building.
So for everyone listening, whether you're learning something new now, helping your kids learn, or involved in education, the encouragement here is to embrace active methods.
Yes. Write things down. Solve problems, even if you make mistakes. Rehearse key ideas actively. Don't just read or highlight passively.
And look for, or maybe even adapt, learning materials that let you interact, that let you engage physically and spatially. Promote that sense of building knowledge for yourself.
Because true understanding, the kind that lasts, is constructed from within. It's not just poured in.
There's a quote from the source material that sums it up well.
Ah, yes. Let education evolve, not through more teaching, but through deeper learning. Let books not just inform, but transform the brain task by task, brain page by brain page.
It really is time to think differently about learning. Not just more teaching, but smarter brain activation. Build your brain pages, activate learnography, turn learning materials into real brain power starting today.